Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's edition of Welcome Change. Those who are joining us for the first time, every week, Ashoka is hosting a half hour, like a news hour, where we present insights, wisdom, and solutions from social entrepreneurs around a pressing social issue. And my guest today is Gemma Galdón. She is the CEO and founder of Éticas Foundation and Consulting. She's a leading voice in the field of ethics and tech, specifically on AI and bias, on algorithmic accountability. And we'll be learning more about Gemma's work over the course of the next approximately 30 minutes. My own name is Constanza Frischen. I lead Ashoka's work around tech and humanity. I am based in Washington, D.C., so it's very early my time. Gemma is dialing in from Madrid, actually from a train station where she had to be this afternoon, I guess. And thank you for making it work, Gemma. What's going to happen? Yes, and what's going to happen now for everyone, Gemma and I will be having a conversation for the next 15-20 minutes or so, and you guys can type into the Q&A box any question you might have for Gemma, and we're going to field them later and hopefully get to answer quite a few. And with that, let's get started. Gemma, welcome again. Thank you for dialing in.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, it's a pleasure. You're an Ashoka Fellow, obviously. And as I said, your work is around tech and ethics. And also you're touching questions like rationality and technology and human behavior. And let's start. When we were preparing for this meeting, you were telling me that your PhD looked deeper into that and was looking at, like, why are mayors and towns buying CCTV cameras, even though they are not really working that well? So tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, my PhD changed over the years. I initially approached it as a sociology exercise to look at public space and what was happening in public space. And I soon realized that one of the artifacts that was affecting how we use and what we do in public space was surveillance cameras. And so I started looking at them, and specifically them, and see how public space was seen through the lens of the camera. And I learned a lot in that exercise. And I found a community around technology and society issues. So it was an amazing experience. But one of the things that I realized is that oftentimes our technology decisions are not rational at all. We're in love with technology. We tend to believe that every technology works and works well, and it's actually better than humans. And so I found that even though cameras have been proven not to work, not to improve safety and security in densely populated urban areas, where we're installing those cameras is precisely in densely populated urban areas. And so that led me to just questioning, how come we make so many bad decisions around the field of technology? And these opened an amazing space to work at the intersection between sociology, the social sciences, humanities, and technology.
So one thing you told me is that mayors were installing these cameras because it increased their chances of being reelected, because it showed that people are taking action, that they are modern, they are doing something. And as you say, it reflects a belief in technology being, great and omnipotent. So you are stripping back the layers to reveal what is underneath. And one thing you were saying very clearly, which is obviously true, is data and is not neutral, and technology is not neutral. So where does the bias come in?
Well, bias comes in at different places. What I do is I look at society through our technological choices. And that says so much about who we are as a society. And it's just amazing because also the tools that technology gives you to look at society increase the amount of things that you can look at. So for me, it's been revolutionary in terms of how I think about society and how I use the social sciences to impact on society. I often say, when people say that technology is neutral, that archaeologists, they reveal a space that was covered for centuries, for millennia sometimes, and they try to understand which society created the artifacts that they find. So they're understanding society through their artifacts, through their technology. In the same way, our technologies of today tell us similar things about the kind of society that we are. And that's what I'm trying to highlight and show. And one of the things that I'm finding is that what our technologies currently reflect, if we had an archaeologist coming from several centuries in the future and came back, and they would see that we are a very unequal society. So the asymmetries in the use and abuse and knowledge of how technology works are massive, but also how there's a lot of bias in our societies because our technologies are reflecting that. And so we see how algorithms and AI systems tend to capture and reproduce racial bias, gender bias, or any kind of exclusionary dynamics that our society currently has.
And usually we tend to think, okay, data is objective, right? Data is being brought in to lift up the discussion to a level where it's beyond like our, subjective beliefs. And so tell us why that is not necessarily the case. Like give us some examples where we see that bias comes in.
Well, first, technology is not a new friend. It's not a person that we talk to. Technology is something that we create.
So it's human-made.
Exactly. And so all our issues and also bias can be translated into that technology, and effectively are. But also if that technology is trained on real life data, then of course real life dynamics will be translated into that technology unless we compensate for those bias, which is what we do when we audit algorithms. We realize that our social context is not perfect, that people are biased, and we compensate the vulnerable groups that may find themselves affected by an algorithm. But at the end of the day, an algorithm, it's just a mathematical calculation. So it's if A and B, then C, and you can make that a lot more complex, but that's what it is. It's a set of commands. And so algorithms can only make fairly simple decisions compared to what we humans do when we use our creativity and ability to improvise. Algorithms cannot do that. Algorithms are very good at what they do, but what they do is not replace a human. They do parts of what we do, and they do some things that we can do much better than us because they can process a lot more data. But for instance, in the US, in the state of Chicago, they used an algorithm to assess the performance of teachers. And everyone thought, humans are biased, so maybe we are firing the wrong teachers. Let's use a neutral and rational algorithm that will determine who is the best teacher. Well, when that algorithm was questioned, it was found that the way it made decisions on the quality of teachers was the results of their students in math and language. That's the only thing that the algorithm could measure. So it's not a person looking at something like we would. It's just a mathematical formula that can only look at the data that you ask it to look at, and can only learn that the data is flawed unless you train it to understand that the data is flawed.
That's a really interesting example because the algorithm was equating performance of students with the level of teaching without taking into account that, socioeconomic backgrounds and, all of that influences how good you are in school.
But also giving teachers a really bad message. Just put your effort in math and language only because everything else doesn't matter, which is completely the wrong message. You don't want to tell that to teachers. You want teachers to be engaged. You want teachers to transmit values. All that was lost in the way that the algorithm measured performance and good performance.
Yeah. So you could say, well, Chicago is very far away from wherever, I live, but algorithms are also impinging on our daily lives, from credit decisions to the emergency room. Give us a few examples, perhaps, that illustrate that.
Well, we've seen more and more hospitals that choose to have algorithms discriminating people when you go to the doctor. So you go to the emergency room, and the decision on how soon to see you, how urgent your medical emergency is decided by an algorithm. And we've already found problems with that, both in terms of the source data, but also in terms of the, in this case, the racial discrimination, because when you have collectives, groups of people that have usually used the health system less because of historical discrimination, then of course the algorithm learns that that's what it should do. So in technical terms, a perfect algorithm is an algorithm that perfectly reflects the discrimination of society. And of course, we know that there's discriminations that we don't want to reproduce. We don't want women to continue to be discriminated against. We don't want non-white people to continue to be discriminated against. But that's exactly what algorithms do. They capture this and they reproduce it, so they make it even more of a problem. The same with banking algorithms, because up until very recently, the banking representative of a family was the father, the man. Banks have a lot more historical information on men. And so if you just train an algorithm on historical information, the algorithm will understand that women have more risk, even though statistics say that we are better at repaying loans, that we have better credit scores. Still, because the historical data says that we are an outlier in the database, that we are infrarepresented. So the algorithm understands that we should be assigned more risk. And so there are studies that say that women get 10 to 20 times less credit than men just because of this inheritance of discriminatory data that goes into the algorithm.
Super interesting. So now so there is the as you said, like the societal discriminations get reflected in the algorithm, and then there's also the fact that those who train algorithms or decide what to focus on, choose the model, et cetera, are often a very homogeneous group.
Yeah, well, one of the issues, of course, is the diversity in teams. In the teams that produce this technology. There's a very recent case. The Met Museum came up with this, in theory, pretty cool tool that you could use to upload a picture of yourself and be translated into a picture, like not a picture, like a painting. So it would use your face and show you how you would look if you were painted, using the historical data of all the paintings that they have at the Met Museum. I am assuming that the whole team was white and male because no one thought to test the algorithm on women or Black people. And so when you uploaded your picture and you were Black, the algorithm would turn you white because the historical data was white men, because Black men did not get to be represented in paintings in the past. And women would become young women because in historical paintings, women are always young, because that's how we've been treated as a group in the past. And so the fact that no one tested this before launching it into the world, that there was no one who was Black or a woman in the team that uploaded their picture and went like, there's something wrong here. That happens over and over again. So I don't think that diversity is the answer to all questions, but I think that so many teams would be a lot better prepared to identify issues like this if they had someone in their team who could be negatively affected by those algorithms. And the problem is that because on the internet and on data in data sets, white men are the absolute majority. For all algorithms, white men are the norm. And anyone who's not a white man that has an active life in their middle age is an outlier. And so anyone who's not that is discriminated. We're seeing a lot of discrimination of younger people and older people as well, because anyone who's not a middle-aged white man becomes discriminated by design, by the algorithm. And that is a huge problem, because discriminating against you means not only that you may not be served the best advertising when you enter a website, it also means that you maybe don't have access to credit or to social services, to unemployment, to health services, to lots of things that are increasingly being decided by these algorithms.
So let's move on to the solution angle. Where does your work come in?
Well, when I started working on this, and together with the team at Ethicas, initially we just did what there was demand for it. So, and luckily there was a lot of demand for people working at the intersection between technology, society, and social sciences and engineering. And so initially we're just being asked to do a lot of projects and use our social science skills to interact with technical teams. But then after some time, we were like, how can we be more proactive? We're seeing so many things that work badly in technology. We have so much insight because we combine this social understanding with the technical understanding. How could we be more useful and more proactive, and how do we approach solutions? And so we've done lots of things. So we have lines with research, we promote other organizations working on responsible technology, we do strategic litigation, we get very engaged in the debates of the present, we do policy impact, but we also developed a methodology for auditing algorithms. And we feel that in the near future, we'll look back at 2020 and be like, how come we were deploying algorithms back then that were not being audited? It's like selling a car without a seatbelt or without a speed limit. Like no one, it's just unthinkable, even though a car doesn't need those things. Those are things that we've put in to make them safer and to reconcile innovation with societal impact. So what we've done is develop this methodology that allows us to go to technical teams and say, listen, if you want to deploy this algorithm in high-risk scenarios, and a high-risk scenarios is any scenario that has a social impact, that is making decisions about the life chances or opportunities of specific people. If you have one of those algorithms, and there's loads of those, you need to audit it. You need to tell us how you've made decisions. You need to tell us how you've protected vulnerable communities in your system, and you need to work with us in increasing the transparency and the ability of people to seek redress if they feel that they've been badly affected by an algorithmic outcome.
And what is the response you're getting? I'm assuming not everyone is very open to that yet.
Well, I think there's an increased awareness, that's for sure. I mean, the amount of people, and you can see it in the media, talking about these issues has increased massively in the last few years. So I think we have a mature debate space, but it still has not translated into actions. I think one of the problems we've had is that this debate has been very much limited to abstract notions of fairness and non-discrimination, but no one's landing this into what does this mean in technical specifications? Because that's what we need. We don't just need good intentions. The way to hell is paved with good intentions, especially in tech. We need good practices. We need people that are showing the way in how to protect women in banking algorithms, ethnic minorities in medical algorithms, children of migrant in child risk assessment algorithms. We need good practices in how to do those things. And so through algorithmic auditing, that's what we're trying to do. Work with people that need these social science with engineering input to work with their teams and make sure that we protect all people inside of those technical systems, of those algorithms. And it's working pretty well. And we have clients. Of course, no one has a budget for algorithmic auditing yet, but we are opening the space for that. And we're also fostering an ecosystem. We realize that algorithmic auditing will not become the norm unless a lot of people know what it is and do it. So we also want to help others become algorithmic auditors and go around the world fixing tech.
And you also see the regulatory framework changing, right?
Totally, but it's been changing for quite a lot of time, especially in Europe, but not only. There's initiatives also in the US and Latin America, especially in India even. In Europe, we've had fairly good laws for 3 years already that no one's complying with. So we have a huge enforcement problem. And we need to see how to bridge that gap between having a law and having people actually realizing there's a law and changing their practices to abide by that law. That's why algorithmic auditing is so timely, because it's a practical response to the requirements of these laws that ask for explainability in algorithms, transparency in algorithms, specifically for algorithmic auditing. So all the things that the law is concerned about can be addressed through an algorithmic auditing or an algorithmic assessment. So it's one way of landing these sometimes complex and too abstract legal principles that need to become, in the end, standards.
I was screening the chat, and there's one question that fits very neatly in here from the audience. That is, who should be held accountable when an algorithm is confirmed to be biased? Should it be the program developer, the company, nobody? What would you say?
A few years ago, we had this debate, and there was quite a lot of people saying, oh, maybe algorithms should have a legal persona and we should be able to take algorithms to jail. Luckily, that has passed. I want to say very clearly, it's ludicrous to consider that an algorithm or a robot can have a legal personality. You would never give your car a legal personality. Why would you give it to an algorithm or a set of mathematical calculations? There's responsibility behind those algorithms. But our legal system still has problems dealing with that. So we had the case of an automated Uber that killed a pedestrian in Arizona a couple of years ago, and when the issue went to court, it was found that the algorithms in the car could not recognize humans outside of crosswalks, which is terrible to learn. That we have these technologies that don't abide by the minimal safety standards. But then when this went to court, in the end, the person that was jailed was the driver, who thought they were in an autonomous car, and of course they were looking at their phone, and when the car realized it was going to crash and gave up, it only gave the person microseconds by which it has been psychologically proved that it's impossible for a human being to understand the complex context and avoid a crash in the time that an autonomous car gives you to regain control. So basically, that person was jailed for something that they could not avoid. But still, our legal system feels much more comfortable dealing with immediate people than a software company that is in the background. But definitely, we should lay the blame, or at least scrutinize the care and whether algorithms have been audited before they hit the market, before they have social impact. And that's what should go to court and should be put on trial and should pay a consequence for really bad practices.
You mentioned strategic litigation is also an area you are moving into, right?
Well, because when the laws are ignored, all you have left are the courts, because the law is there. And so the only way that we can promote enforcement right now is through awareness, through proposing tools and skills like we're doing with the algorithmic auditing, but also going to courts and pointing at the bad players in the industry and saying, listen, there should be rewards for good players, but also there should be a consequence for bad players. And so we're working specifically on facial recognition at the moment to take to court some developments, specifically in Spain, which we find are outside of the law. And luckily, we're joined by lots of other groups at the EU level, specifically working on this. So there's quite a lot of activity and quite a lot of civil society organizations that have realized that the only resource they have at the moment are the courts.
There is a question from the audience, and do you also work in the initial phases of the design of the algorithms besides the audit? So, which
yes.
opens up so what happens along the entire value chain?
So basically, we call it audit, and that's what we hope to do in the future. But at the moment, we do algorithmic assessments, because what we find needs so much work that actually we don't just say whether things are working well or not. If we identify that something is not working, we just redo it, we rebuild it together with the organization we're working with, the client and the provider of the algorithm. So our algorithm, our methodology for algorithmic auditing has three main parts that I'll go over very briefly. In the first part, we assess whether a specific social problem has been rightly conceptualized in terms of data inputs. And that's really important. So how do we translate a social concern into data points? How and why do we choose the data that we choose? There's a famous example, infamous example, linked to the prioritization of people in an emergency room. An insurance company in the US that owns several hospitals uses an algorithm to do triage in the emergency room. And what was found by an audit precisely conducted by some academics in the US was that because it was an insurance company, they built the algorithm with the data they had, not what they needed. And so they built it using financial data. So the seriousness of your injury or illness was assessed on the basis of past expenditure. So whether your disease had been expensive to cure in the past, that's an amedical way of approaching medicine. It's just wrong. You're making the wrong decisions because you're not taking into account medical issues. But because that's the data they had, that's the easy data to use, that's exactly what they did. So we want to avoid people making those mistakes. And we see a lot of that, using the easy data and not the data that you need. And so we try to first frame the issue in terms that make sense. Then the most technical part, we define who the vulnerable communities can be. Like in the case of banking, we know that women may be discriminated in those data sets because of being underrepresented historically. So we see how to protect them through statistics. So we use the tools of statistics to protect them inside the algorithm, so that the algorithm doesn't learn that infrarepresentation should lead to assigning more risk in the actual decision. So that's the second part, the most technical part that I'm not the most qualified person to talk about. And luckily, we always work as a team. Like you cannot audit an algorithm on your own unless you're super skilled in lots of different fields. But we always have to mobilize several people, and I think that's pretty crucial. And then the third part of the algorithm is also looking at how the algorithmic decision is impacting on the ways of working in the organization. So usually the algorithmic decision goes to a person who then needs to use that decision or communicate it to a client, a citizen, whatever. And we find that oftentimes in that third part, the worst of algorithmic discrimination meets the worst of human discrimination, human bias. And so we want to make sure that the people that are using those algorithmic decisions understand how they work, understand how they should incorporate them in their decision-making process.
Let's go to that. So the person, let's say the software developer or the the specialist inside a corporation, when you think of diversity in teams and formation of thinking, what do you think needs to happen there? I'm imagining when you're being trained as a mathematician, you don't necessarily learn about philosophy, perhaps, or social sciences.
Clearly, and especially in engineering, like I think that physics, mathematics, they are disciplines that are more used to being multidisciplinary. And it's easier if you're trained in those fields to have access to other disciplines. Engineering is until now has been incredibly kind of boxed in just technical issues, and also this kind of feeling of, the social problems are not my problem. I'm just the techie guy, and that's just really, really wrong. The decisions that those engineers make have profound social impact, but I often say that we are asking engineers to code a world that they don't understand. So I don't necessarily blame them personally. They haven't been trained to know all these things. But in the same way that in a company, not everyone has to know about accounting, you let yourself be helped by people that know about this. With algorithmic auditing, you probably need external help. It's okay, you can keep your team of engineers, but make sure that at critical points, you incorporate the knowledge that you need in order to come up with a quality product that complies with the law, that avoids reputational risks, because at the end of the day, if you're a bank and people find out that you've been discriminating women for a long time, that is a huge reputational risk, but also risks in terms of performance. If you're giving unemployment benefits to people that don't deserve it, that is a huge problem. So if you want to avoid all these things, you probably need external people to jump in your team at specific moments, maybe the 3 moments that I defined, and ensure that all those things are built by design in your system. So I think that this space of combination of the technical and the social is clearly the way to go. The only way to build responsible technology and technology that can make us proud as a society is by getting together the best of technology, the best of engineering with the best of the social sciences.
So here's a question again in the chat that asks about what are your thoughts on who ought to make decisions? And do you have examples where people have been getting the who right?
What do you mean the who right?
I guess the question is are there examples of, sort of algorithms where, that have been designed responsibly with community input? I'm assuming.
Not really. There's not a lot of good practice. What we have is a lot of bad practice that we can learn from. So basically the opposite of bad practice is good practice. So that's how we learn at the moment. What I can tell you is that we find a lot more lack of knowledge than bad faith. We don't have such bad quality and discriminatory technology and non-compliant technology because people are evil. We really don't see that. What we see is people that have good intentions, but they just don't have the tools. So it is a fixable thing, because no one wants to build an algorithm that discriminates. No one wants to build a bad algorithm. No one wants to create a liability for their government or their company. So it's something we can work on, because I think everyone's on the same line. We need to fix this. The issue is how. And the issue is convincing those that want better algorithms that having a good algorithm will imply also investing in this part, and that a good algorithm is an algorithm that is tailored. And the current technological industry wants to sell the same algorithm to everyone. But of course, an emergency room doesn't have the same needs as a mall or a supermarket or a public administration. The best algorithms are the algorithms that are tailored to a specific social problem, to a specific context, also in terms of culture and historical discrimination. All these things need to be taken into account. And yes, that means that the tool itself will take longer to elaborate, will probably be more expensive, but at the end, you will be making better decisions. What we're finding right now is quite a lot of investment on technology, but still really bad decisions coming out of that funnel of data processes.
I'm debating with myself whether to ask one more question. Perhaps, here's one that says, what happens with the nonprofit sector that are also being sold algorithms, or that are being, persuaded to use data to be more objective? What should nonprofit actors be aware of?
Not only are they also being persuaded, but oftentimes they are leading the way. One of the things that we're finding in technology, and that links with the inequality thing that I was mentioning at the beginning, we are testing the most sensitive algorithms on the most vulnerable populations. In Spain, we are using algorithms to assess the risk of women at risk of domestic violence, the risk of recidivism of people that leave jail, whether we give financial help to people in vulnerable communities. We start with the most vulnerable. So I think it is the task of all the nonprofit sector to understand that technology changes, alters, incorporates new challenges that need to be taken into account. The things that they have been protecting and defending in the offline world for so long need to be translated into the online world. Oftentimes, the rights and values and protections that we have hardly won in the non-digital world do not translate. And so things that are illegal in the real world are happening in digital tools. So I think that the nonprofit sector needs to get their act together in a nice way. I mean it. A lot of them are making huge efforts, but to understand that their world has changed and that the people that they're helping all of a sudden have different challenges, and they often include technology, so they need to become also more proficient in those tools. And finally, they need to not be seduced by the chance of artificial intelligence. Find someone who can help you make good decisions. Try to understand whether you actually need that tool, because maybe you don't, or maybe you can support it in the long run. But I think that the nonprofit sector, more than anyone else, has a responsibility to make better and responsible choices when it comes to incorporating technology.
Thank you so much, Gemma. We are at the end of our half hour, and thank you everyone for listening in. We'll be following up with an article summarizing the highlights that we talked about. Gemma, have a good day, rest of your day. You have to move on. Thank you everyone for listening in, and see you next week. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My pleasure.
Thank you, Gemma.